Welcome to Pastor's Perspective, sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. My name is Brian Perez, and we are here ready to talk to you, answer your questions about the Bible, the Christian faith, family, just about anything that's on your mind. 888-564-6173 is the number to call. And who do we have on the program today? Well, it's Tuesday. You know what that means. We normally have Tony Clark from Calvary Chapel Newport News in Virginia, and he's here today on Skype. Hello, Tony. Good to see you there. We've also got Bobby Conway, the pastor of Image Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, and also the author and apologist you hear on the One Minute Apologist channel on YouTube and the Unapologetic radio program. And here in the studio for the first time this year, which means it's the first time we're all together for the new year, it's Brian Broderson, the senior pastor of Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa in Southern California, from the Back to Basics radio program. So hello, fellas. What is new?
Hey, everyone. Happy New Year.
Hey, Brian.
Great to see you all.
Yeah, same to you, bud.
Yeah.
Likewise.
And Bobby, I thought you were going to be on a cruise to the Bahamas or something this week. I guess that's not happening, huh? Either that or you took the Bobby Cam with you on the boat, and you're just so committed to the program.
Yeah, well, it's one of those situations that as a mom and dad, you just got to do what you got to do. Our son's been transparent about just some of his mental health struggles and some of the depression, and he kind of sank to a low spot. And we brought him back up from Florida just to make sure that we just spend good time with him and walk him through this. And so I would just ask the listening audience to please pray for our son. He has struggled on and off with depression for many years. And that's a tough thing. And it can actually be pretty all-consuming as a parent, too, because it creates fears in you, and it causes you to lose your focus because, when one of your kids suffers, all of your attention goes right toward that child. So he's home. He's doing better right now, thankfully. But we just felt like, look, we can just postpone this trip and do whatever we need to do to help him just get reoriented.
Amen. I mean, that is really the truth, Bobby, what you're saying. Your kids, your heart's just so wrapped up in their lives, man. When they, when they suffer, we suffer right along with them, don't we?
Absolutely. We sure do.
Yeah. I think of even, to kind of project that beyond ourselves, you think of God, his statement that in the afflictions of his people, he was also afflicted. And how, the Lord, I mean, you think of how you feel right now, thinking about what's happening with your son. Tony, you've gone through stuff with your kids, obviously. I've gone through stuff with my kids, grandkids. Yeah. And that heart of empathy and that heart of, oh my gosh. And, that's the Lord's heart for his people too. So when we have those strong, emotional, compassionate kinds of yearnings, we're actually getting a little taste of the Father's heart toward us as his people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. One of the things that I think that we feel, is I'm thankful that our son, he's already done a video for our church in the past about struggling with mental health, because one of our passions at Image Church is to help those with mental health issues, to see how the gospel can help them. But there's that side of wanting to protect as a mom and a dad, and then you're wanting to model being real through the trial. And there's a fine line there that I don't always know. It's his story to share the things that he struggles with, but at a big picture level, fortunately, he's not. It isn't the drugs and the alcohol. He has just struggled with depression for many years, and sometimes it comes out of nowhere. Yeah. And I heard somebody put it really well. Like you got these 4 levels, and level 1 is kind of the cloud of depression. It's out there, but it's not over you, and you just know that it's there, and it can come at any moment. Level 2, the cloud's over you. Now you kind of feel in a funk, but you're still functioning. Level 3, now you're starting to find that your capacity is messed up and you're not functioning well. Level 4, you're thinking about an exit strategy. And so it was a helpful way for me to think about that whole idea of how do we help people who are in depression and know how to handle and grope with the different stages as they come along our way in life.
Yeah. And depression is, man, it's a beast, it's, and honestly, unless you've really ever experienced it, it's hard to even get your head around it. I mean, we all have up days, down days, we have days where we feel, we might say, well, I'm depressed and, we might be to a certain extent, but when you have a clinical type of a depression, that is a whole nother level of,
absolutely.
The torment is really, what it comes down to. So, man, well, we're going to be praying for him. You bet.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate it, bud.
All right. 888-564-6173 is our number this afternoon. Let's start with a question sent in on Facebook.com/pastorsperspective. Ephraim sent this one in. A friend let me borrow a book to read, but I realize the author is a Seventh-day Adventist. Should I read such books? This one in particular is called After the Order of Melchizedek by R. Hope Robertson. Tony, have you read that book? Are you familiar with it? Or should Ephraim should he even read these books?
I wouldn't recommend it. That's just me. Because there's too many good books to read and especially the Bible to read. I wouldn't recommend it, especially a person who doesn't know the ins and outs of Seventh-day Adventism, that they will begin to read this author's views and may get swayed, may get deceived. So I wouldn't recommend reading the book. There's too many great books out there from really good authors, and especially the Bible itself.
Yeah. Brian, any thoughts?
I agree with Tony. Yeah, I think that's good advice. Why waste your time on something that is going to be confusing at best and, misleading and all? Yeah, I wouldn't bother.
Yeah. Bobby?
No, I think that what the guy said is great. I mean, the only thing I might add, their advice to not read it, it's not that they don't think that, Christianity can handle the test of reading maybe a Seventh-day Adventist book that might have some funky teachings in it. And I'm not saying that Seventh-day Adventists, that there's not legitimate Christians within it, but there are some aberrant teachings. And so, unless somebody is studying to kind of do apologetics as it relates to Seventh-day Adventists to point out some of the weaknesses of their theology, it doesn't make sense in light of all the good books to spend your time camped out there.
Now, we often get, questions about different books and videos on YouTube and all this other stuff, and we tell people to stay, like we are right now, stay away from this book. But there might be people saying, well, what is it that you're trying to hide? Maybe they're right and you guys are wrong. And why is it that you don't want me to read this book?
Well, Seventh-day Adventism is it's a deviation from Orthodox Christianity. So we're not worried about, oh no, they might find out the secret, that we're wrong and they're right. We're just trying to help somebody avoid the headache of wasting time in a book that's going to take you down a road that you don't want to go down. I mean, Seventh-day Adventism is, for the most part, it's legalism. It's just a bundle of legalism and all different kinds of manifestations. And the Bible says, let the heart be established in grace, not in foods and in, different things. And ironically, that passage in Hebrews, that says that, not to let the heart be established with grace, not with foods and not with special days and so forth. That's exactly what that's exactly what Seventh-day Adventism and the Jehovah's Witnesses, by the way, we'll throw them in there too. That's exactly what they do. So, I mean, they're known historically as cult groups. So it's not like there's some secret out there that we just got to keep this under wraps because, man, we don't want anybody to know what these guys are saying because we're afraid it's going to undermine their faith.
Yeah.
Well, it might undermine their faith because they're not mature enough to handle it. But for somebody who has a solid foundation in Scripture, you're going to be able to read it and go, oh, yeah, that's not right, and that's incorrect, and that's not true. And why did I read this book anyway? What a waste of time.
Yeah. Also, I just wonder about the person who gave them that book, whether they are dabbling into the Seventh-day Adventist movement and they're trying to proselytize this guy as well. So I just wonder.
Yeah, and I do want to just say, Bobby mentioned it, and I'll say it again too. We're not saying across the board, broad brush painting here that there's no Seventh-day Adventists who aren't genuinely Christians. There are. But if you hold fast to Ellen G. White's teaching, you're going to have a hard time in your spiritual life, and you're going to have a hard time maintaining an Orthodox Christian position. So.
All right, Ephraim, thank you for sending in your question on Facebook.com/pastorsperspective. Let's do one more from Facebook before we go to the phones at 888-564-6173. RJ in California wants to know if God's love is conditional, unconditional, or both. Brian?
Well, God's love is unconditional, but our experiencing God's love is conditional. Jude, that little letter in the New Testament, right at the end of the New Testament, right before Revelation, it says, keep yourselves in the love of God, which implies that you can put yourself in a place where even though God still loves you, you're not able to experience God's love. So I think the easiest way to illustrate it would be, say, a wayward, rebellious child. Mm-hmm. So if you have a child that's wayward and rebellious, you probably, I think if you're a good parent, you love them deeply, but you're not able to do any of the things that love wants to do because of their resistance, because of their rebellion. So I think that's the way we need to understand it, that God's love is unconditional, but there are conditions to experiencing his love, and we can put ourselves outside of those conditions.
Yeah. Tony, anything to add?
No, that was good.
All right. RJ, thank you for sending in your question on Facebook.com/pastorsperspective.
And before we go...
I think I know where you're going, and that's where I was going to
go. Well, no, I'm going to go toward a fake Instagram account that somebody has produced.
Really?
Actually pretending like
now
they're
you
me.
Tell me. Now you tell me.
So if you're getting any Instagram private messages from me where I'm prophesying over you, and eventually I'm probably going to be asking you for money, just know that I am not doing this. This is a fake account. We've reported it a number of times. Hopefully they'll get it dealt with. I did post something showing a picture of the account, and you can tell by the numbers of followers. So the numbers of followers, I think it started off with 0, and then it jumped to 700. So they must have purchased some followers to try to make it look legit. So, my account has over 10,000 followers on it. So just know that is not me, and hopefully this will get rectified by Instagram ASAP.
So if you want to follow Brian, make sure it's the one with 10,000 followers, not the one with 700. All right. So it was a week ago today that we got the news that our friend Ray Bentley had graduated to heaven. We got the news right before the program started. We didn't want to say anything on the radio just in case. I mean, we were all hoping that it wasn't true. It came from it came from people we could trust, but you still got to verify information as big as that. So, but all that to say that I know Tony was looking at the screen here, and we were seeing all these messages come up, and at one point it looked like Tony wanted to say something like, "Oh no," and I was like, "Don't say anything yet because we're not sure." But so Tony and Brian, we have not heard your thoughts on Ray Bentley. By the way, his memorial service will be Friday, January 21st at Maranatha Chapel in San Diego. But Brian.
Yeah, well, Tony, let Tony weigh in, and then I will. Yeah.
Pastor Ray was he was someone that really just blessed my heart. I remember we were at Bridge Fest together in New Jersey, and he just said, "Hey," let's sit down and talk. You know, I want to get to know Tony Clark. And he just took time with me. And then we were in Seattle speaking together. Then he said, I want Maranatha Chapel to get to know Tony Clark. He invited me to speak there. And then throughout COVID, he would just call me and just see how I was doing, how the church was doing, how I was doing personally. And I tell people all the time, I believe if I told him, hey, you know, we're struggling this way or that way, he would have wrote a check and sent it to me with no problem. I believe that in the deepest part of my heart. So I was really, and on top of that, I was not going to definitely say anything on the air. I was just watching the screen and I was just saying, no, that I pray that's not right. We got it at the half an hour mark is when we got it. I saw the information. Well, I saw it around a little bit before we broke for the break.
Yeah.
And I was just trying to wrestle through all of that. And but he was just such a great man and always encouraged me. And Pastor Brian wrote just a tremendous tribute to him that just says it all.
Yes, indeed. CalvaryChapel.com.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I pretty much summarized it in the tribute that I wrote to Ray. Our friendship was about a 40-year friendship, and we met and connected when we were really young, both young pastors in our 20s, and pastoring in the same county, San Diego County, and the Lord knit our hearts at that time, and then just from that day forward, I think of so many places I traveled with Ray around the world, and one of the things that I was thinking that I had kind of, I've been so many places with him in the last 10 years that I had kind of forgotten, but man, many, many years ago, before the Lord clearly called us to England, but when that whole thing was starting to develop, Ray went with me on a trip, kind of a scouting trip to England. And it was Ray and Richard Semino, and it was my daughter Kristen and Ray's daughter Annie, and it was Richard's daughter Deborah. And we just had this, fantastic time. I remember having planted the church in London. I remember Ray coming. I very vividly remember Ray preaching on a Sunday morning in London to the church and people just, loving him. Ray was a tremendous Bible teacher. He really, really was a great, great Bible teacher. And beside that, he was just one of the most loving, kind men that I've known. And I was saying to a friend yesterday who is also a friend of Ray's and a friend of another friend of ours who passed away back in 2014. I said, this is like that. Ray is now the second person that's died that I have been deeply connected with in a personal, friendship as well as ministry. Obviously, Pastor Chuck would be that too, but he's kind of a different category there. But so heart just goes out to the family, to Vicky, to Danny, to Annie, and all of them. And I watched a little bit of a video of their Sunday service, and it seemed like the Lord was really giving them grace. Brian, Ray sat in the studio plenty of times with us, and I think it was
just
in
a few
December.
Weeks ago. Yeah.
I wrote in the article that it was November, and then I started thinking, no, that was early December. And we sat here, and if anybody knew Ray, this is what you knew about Ray. Ray was 100% about the second coming of Jesus.
Yes.
I mean, that was he was, that was his deal. Bible prophecy, Israel, that was Ray Bentley. And so, I remember that last time we were together and we left the studio, and he was saying, Brian, the Lord's coming soon. He could be coming in 2022. And you know what? He was right.
He did.
The Lord did come.
Yeah.
The Lord came and said, come on, Ray, come on up. Yeah. And actually his daughter said that when he was basically transitioning to heaven, he had sort of a vision where he just said, I'm going up the mountain of the Lord, and Jesus is with me. And then he was gone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Crazy. Very sudden.
Wow.
Yeah. Very unexpected, obviously, but.
Indeed. He will be missed.
Will be missed.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So again, the memorial service is on January 21st. It's about a week and a half from now on a Friday at 1 p.m. In person at Maranatha Chapel in San Diego, as well as online at maranathachapel.org. All right, to the phones we go. 888-564-6173. Here is Angel in California. Welcome to Pastor's Perspective, Angel.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for having me.
You bet.
Yeah, I have a two-part question. Okay, so I have a 1-year-old daughter. There was a season I was in ministry, but now I'm kind of busy, so is it okay to be in ministry right now, take some time off? And then my second part is, why did Jesus start his ministry at 33? Is there a specific symbolism to 33? Why not 32 or 30?
How old are you, Angel?
I'm 27.
Okay, I'm just wondering if you're wondering, can I wait 6 years before I jump back in? Or I don't know. Bobby, go ahead. What's your what would you say to Angel?
Well, we're not exactly sure if Jesus was 30, 31, 32. We just know he's kind of in that range. And some of that is there's confusion around when he was born exactly. So depending upon when you would say that he's born, that you might come to some of that. But at about the age of 30, I've heard some people say, oh, he would have lived to be about 35. So I've heard that mixed up. But, I'm comfortable with 33 is when he dies, and at about the age of 30, he starts his public ministry. And as far as the why at the age of 30, in the fullness of time, God sent forth his son, and that was just the time for him to start doing what his ministry required him to do. And the Bible doesn't kind of lay out a clear pathway of some people might say, okay, well, the priests in the Old Testament were 30, but that is true, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's why Jesus started that public ministry at 30 exactly. That's a good, interesting insight, and it's very probable or plausible, but I don't think it's something that we can guarantee. As it relates to you with your 1-year-old, I can't answer that for you. That would be more of a counseling situation where you would just need to sit down with somebody. I would say, of course, if your family needs you, it's okay to push some pause and slow things down in the ministry. But sometimes it might just mean reprioritizing some other things before maybe even ministry. It could be that you've got some loose time in other areas that could be buttoned up. And so I would have to ask you a bunch of questions, and then obviously this format's not the place for that.
Yeah. Tony, anything to add?
In Luke 3, right around verse 23, it said Jesus started his ministry at 30 years of age. And so I do believe that there is some validity to the priests beginning at age 30. They pretty much ended their ministry right around 50 years old. And so seeing that Jesus came to, to fulfill the old, to establish the new, if Jesus deviated from anything of the Old Testament, then the Jews as well as the religious leaders would have blasted him and given him a hard time. So I do think it's somewhat plausible that he started at around 30 years of age, and just like the priests in the Bible. As far as the personal thing, I agree with you, great doctor, on that. 1 Timothy 3, verses 4 and 5 says, if a man doesn't know how to take care of his own house, how can he take care of the house of God? So there seemed to be a dual ministry there, a ministry at home and a ministry at church. And it's not necessarily a either or, it's a both and. And when you're at home to minister to your family. When you're at church to minister to God's people. That's just my take on it. And some may, disagree with that, but I'm okay with that.
Let's hear from Angel what he thinks before we ask Brian's opinion.
Okay. Yeah. Understand both views.
All right.
Yeah, it helps a lot.
Okay. Brian, any thoughts?
No, it's good.
All right.
These guys did a great job. They're earning their keep. They're,
It's about time.
You know how much we pay these guys, so they're earning their.
Well, I do think that where it says in Luke 3:23 at about the age of 30, it's tough to know if, it seems like they're approximating, but I don't think there's anything wrong with, he's 30 and he's dying at the age of 33. That's what I've always been most comfortable with. If somebody wants to it says he's about the age of 30, it seems like they're not quite sure exactly. And that wouldn't be uncommon in the ancient world either, for people not to know exactly how old people are. That's the way it is in certain parts of the world even today, where sometimes people don't know exactly how old they are. I think about a good friend of mine whose dad, I think he recently found out a few years ago that he was a different age than he always thought. And so we're able to categorize that stuff a lot easier, but that's certainly not a theological thing we're dying on. Unless somebody's going to say, he was 50, then that's going to be problematic as well. But the very fact that he says at about the age of 30, I guess if you were to say that means he could have been 31 or 32, then when it comes to the Old Testament priest starting at maybe the exact age of 30, then you would have a little bit of discrepancy in that way. So hence leaving a little bit of flexibility for that. I don't think that Jesus, if he started at 31 or 32, it would have made his problems any more dramatic with his skeptics than if he started at 30. I think he had enough problems on his hands, but nevertheless, I think Tony's point's, well worth digesting.
And this isn't really worth talking about anymore, but since I was just reading Hebrews 7 this morning about the fact that Moses spoke nothing of a priesthood for
after Melchizedek.
Yes. Yeah. So Jesus is a priest of a whole other category. And so I don't think, even though, Tony, I would go right there too, because I know the priests do start at 30. Jesus is going to conduct a priestly ministry, but not a priestly ministry like the Levitical priest. So, it's one of those things. It's like, well, okay, they started at 30. Jesus was about 30. Jesus did do a priestly function. He offered sacrifice. He sacrificed himself. So, but, this kind of stuff, it's fun to talk about and, sort of bat it back and forth. But in the end, it's like, okay, whatever.
Angel, thank you for calling today with your questions here on Pastor's Perspective at 888-564-6173. Hope that helps. All right, we're going to go to Diana in California. How can we help you, Diana?
Good afternoon, gentlemen. I have a couple of quick questions. Due to the recent holiday, one of the topics that came up in my circle of friends and family is, it's kind of twofold. One, how old was Joseph when he married Mary? There's a couple of, I think, notations in the Bible that he might have been around 80. And the question then is, he was married before and had children. Did Mary and Joseph have any children together after she gave birth to Jesus? Those are the two questions.
Well, the second one we know she did.
Yeah.
They did.
Yeah.
I'm shocked
I
that...
was looking in the Bible and I couldn't find anything.
Yeah. Well, that's because it's not in there. So the Bible doesn't tell us. I can pretty much guarantee that he was not 80. There's no 80-year-old marrying a 15-year-old in the Bible. That's not happening. Was Joseph older than Mary? Maybe not. It says that they were betrothed. It says that they were engaged to each other when all of these things happen. It seems more like they were of a similar age of the typical marrying age. The reason that there's been some suggestion that Joseph had children prior to really goes back to the Catholic doctrine of the Immaculate Conception and the perpetual virginity of Mary, which is not really a biblical idea. It's more just an idea that was invented in the history of Roman Catholicism. So,
Okay.
The kids, the Jesus had brothers and sisters. It tells us their names in the Gospels, And we would just take that to mean that they were the children of Joseph and Mary.
Yep. All right. Going to take a break now. We'll be back with more of your questions at 888-564-6173. Diana, thank you for your questions. 888-564-6173, the number to call. We'll be back in a little bit. Stand by. We're back on Pastor's Perspective, 888-564-6173, the number to call. We are live on this Tuesday afternoon, and we'd love to hear from you at 888-564-6173. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, thank you for doing that. Make sure to share the video with your friends on your social media sites. But if you have a question, call us at the number there on the bottom of your screen, 888-564-6173. And answering your questions today are Brian Broderson, Bobby Conway, and Tony Clark. Ready for more questions, guys?
Yep,
we are.
Do it.
Okay, so we're going to start with Melissa in California. What did you want to know, Melissa?
Yes, hi. I wanted to know if God is the Alpha, the Omega, and the beginning and the end. And I know we don't have this answer, and we're probably not meant to have this answer, but I wanted your perspective on how did he come to be? Has he always been here?
Bobby, what do you tell Melissa?
Yeah, well, we actually do have the answer to that in the scripture. When he's the beginning and the end, that is chronological language. That is time language. So he's the beginning of creation and the end of creation, but that doesn't mean that he began. To imply that would fall into the trap of Hesiod and Homer, the pre-Socratic poets who believed that, gods were fashioned out of the ground or the earth, and that's not the case. A lot of skeptics like to bring that up. If they're atheists in nature, they might say, well, who created God? That's like saying, what does Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata taste like? That's a category mistake. God is an uncreated creator of all things. In Exodus chapter 3, he reveals himself to Moses as the I am. That is the self-existent one. So in a real sense, he's had neither beginning nor end. Because if you were to say, well, then who created God? You would end up with what is known as an infinite regress. You would fill it in. X created God. Well, then who created X? Well, Y created X. Well, then who created Y? Well, Z created Y. And you would go on into absurdity with infinity. And God is eternal. He's self-existent. He's the uncreated, beginningless beginner of all things, the uncaused cause of all things.
Does that make sense, Melissa?
Yeah, it does. I just, there's a lot of things in the Bible, and I'm no skeptic. I know the Bible's real. I know the Bible's 100, and I follow it, as best as I can on my daily journey. But that's so amazing. I cannot wrap my mind around it. So.
Well, you're not alone.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
No one can wrap their mind around it.
Yeah.
Even you guys are pastors. You're supposed to have this all together. No?
God.
You're not people.
Yeah.
No, you're not. You're God made.
When I think of God's eternal nature, and when I think of the vastness of the universe.
Is that your phone?
Oh, gosh. What is that? Some crazy MMA fighter jumping up there. When I think of the vastness of the universe, my mind does start to just kind of spin out, really.
Tony, any thoughts?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, God said himself, he says, from everlasting to everlasting, I'm God. And so he called himself the eternal one. Just like the great doctor said in Exodus 3:14, he says, I am that I am, the self-existing one. It's our minds who cannot comprehend, our finite minds cannot comprehend the infinite God. And we're not supposed to. Because if he can fit in our little brains, then he wouldn't be big enough for our problems and our issues and things. And so that's where faith comes in. We just got to trust him. And because we look at it from man's perspective, with every cause, there's an effect and all that kind of stuff. And we just assuming, well, God must have a cause. No, he doesn't. And we're like, I can't understand that. Well, good. Join the rest of humanity.
Bobby, it looks like you wanted to add something.
The only thing I would add is I do think that it is easier for me to understand that God has to eternally exist than to think that God emerged from, the dust like we did, or, like when you think of the pantheon of the gods that existed, for example, in Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey. When you think about some of those gods, that were created, that they had a beginning, that it is easier for me. I mean, like, how does mind come from non-mind? And so the whole idea that God's an eternal mind, how does person come from non-person? And so I think it's easier to picture the fact that there always has been a God that in a particular place in time, he chose to create a world for us to be a part of. And when you really think about like the incarnation and what that entails, I mean, Jesus is the second person of the Trinity, eternally existing with the Father and the Spirit, chooses to confine himself for the rest of eternity to a human body that he assumed in the incarnation. It's astonishing to think. I mean, like, imagine taking on a dog nature for the rest of eternity. Like, he takes on and he assumes this corporeal, this body that is fastened to him forever, that will always be a part of him. And I think that just goes to show something as well about the sublimity of his love and the grandeur of his love.
Tony, do you have a verse there that you want to share? It looks like you...
No,
just...
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just looking for something else. Yes.
Got it. All right. I'll mind my own business. Melissa, thanks for calling us today on Pastor's Perspective at 888-564-6173. How about we go to Josie in California? What did you want to know, Josie?
Hi. I want to know on Judges chapter 11, I can't pronounce the guy's name, but the guy that won a battle, and then he said, the first thing that comes out to greet me when I get home, I'm going to sacrifice to the Lord. and his daughter was the one that came out to greet him.
Mm-hmm.
Did he sacrifice her, or if it's just that she not allow her to marry and remain a virgin for the rest of her life?
Okay. Brian, we'll start with you on this one.
Well, Josie, this is a really, really challenging passage. And I think there's, basically two camps. One camp says that he went through with it and did sacrifice her. She went with her friends to lament her virginity, meaning that she, was going to die having never been married. And so that's what she was lamenting. And that Jephthah followed through with that. It is a possibility, because the point in Judges is that people were doing what was right in their own eyes. They had abandoned the Lord. They had abandoned His word. And so there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. So that's one possibility. That seems like what it says. But then the other would be to say that, well, actually it wasn't that he sacrificed her or had her put to death, but she was consigned to a perpetual virginity, that she never was allowed to marry, and that was the way the sacrifice was carried out. I like the second one better than the first one. The first one sounds really bad, but I don't honestly know which one it is. So, guys, any thoughts?
Well,
Go ahead, Josie. What were you going to ask?
Remember, there was a man in our village that did that. He had two daughters, and he said they were going to be nuns and they would never marry, and they became nuns. So that reminds me of that.
Interesting. Wow. Yeah, that's it's a
old
good
Spaniard, back in the 30s and 20s. But maybe they got that from the Bible. I don't know.
Mm.
Tony, what were you going to add?
I think that the second one is plausible, because the human sacrifice. Yes, every man did what was right in his own eyes, but what we find a little different about Jephthah is that Jephthah is in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews chapter 11. So I lean towards the second view as well. Because the whole story is just very bizarre. He said, the first thing comes out of my house, I'm going to sacrifice. Did he expect for a lamb or ram to come out of his house? What did he expect to come out of his house first? And he was going to offer as a sacrifice. Did he expect 2 turtle doves to come flying out? What did he expect to come out of his house? And he's going to offer as a sacrifice. So I just think the second one is more plausible. And because we find Jephthah in the Hall of Faith. So there was some faith that was there. And the human sacrifice part, I can't go there with God approving that. I'm not saying that God told him to do that, but I just lean towards the second view.
Bobby, would you say this is an example of being careful the promises that we make to the Lord?
Absolutely. The Bible says in Proverbs 20:25, it is a trap for a person to dedicate something rashly and only later to consider their vow. So for me, I think with Jephthah being in the Hall of Faith, I wouldn't tether it to that particular story. And I think that there's other people that could be in the Hall of Faith and are in a Hall of Faith that did some things that are egregious, yet nevertheless, they had other things in their life that, were praiseworthy. And so I'm thankful that God can see us as a mixed bag and still honor our faith. I think my position would be whichever decision it was that he made, whether to sacrifice her virginity or to sacrifice her life, it was a foolish decision. And it just goes to show that even judges can not be good judges at times.
Josie, thanks for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective.
Well, like you mentioned, Bobby, too. I mean, you've got Samson in the Hall of Faith, and he's a colossal failure in many ways. And you've got Gideon, who, had such a tremendous start.
Lacked faith.
But then in the end, the idolatry that developed. So, it's a hard one. But I just choose to go with the second option, like you said, Tony.
Yeah.
I'm going to go with that one, and if it's something else, then so be it.
Yep. 888-564-6173. Brent, let's get your question. How can we help you?
Hey, how you guys doing?
Doing well, thanks.
Good, thank you.
Okay, hey, my question is, last night, of course, when I can't sleep at night, I put my headphones in, I listen to podcasts, and last night I was listening to Unbelievable with Justin, I forgot his last name.
Briley.
Yeah, I love that show. And so there was a debate there about Martin Luther and the influence he had on Hitler. And so, I was listening to that, and I love Martin Luther. I love the Reformers. But I look at some of his writings towards the end, and they were horrible. What he said about the Jews and, anti-Semitic, and just the writings that I was listening to. I never really read them before, but when I was hearing them last night, I was just blown away. And I just wonder, as a church, as a church, a lot of times we embrace Martin Luther, and I know there's Lutheranism and all that, but I just don't see how, as a church, that we can, when I look at some of the things that he said in those writings there. And I just wanted to know how you guys felt about that. I don't know if you guys know too much about it, but it just kind of blew me away. It kind of bummed me out. It bummed me out, actually, when I was listening to it last night.
Not something that you want to happen when you're trying to fall asleep. Instead, you get worse, more depressed. Brian, what do you tell Brent?
Brent, I think all of us are very familiar with those, some of those statements that Luther made, some of the things that he wrote, and these are indeed unfortunate things. Of course, Hitler, I don't think, Hitler didn't need Luther to inspire him in his anti-Semitism. He was anti-Semitic all of his life, from everything that we know. But he certainly did get some ammunition from some of the things that Luther said. And he would occasionally quote Luther in his propaganda. And this is one of the tragic things. And I think just on the tail end of the conversation we were just having about Judges, you do have in church history some real parallels between what was happening in Israel during the time of the Judges, because you have the same sort of a situation. People who abandon Scripture or misinterpret Scripture. I think the thing with Luther we have to realize is God did use him in an extraordinary way, but he was a man who was subject to failure and weakness. And my take on Luther is that, at a certain point in his life, he just, like any of us potentially could, he became prideful and just thought that he, and this wasn't just with the Jews. Luther, if you disagreed with Luther at certain points and on certain issues, you were disagreeing with God as far as Luther was concerned. So he became, very convinced of his own rightness about so many things. And, Luther, here's another crazy twist to this. Many Jews in Europe, they thought, brace yourself for this, at a point they thought Luther might be the Messiah. This is how messed up they are in their thinking, because he was initially very favorable toward the Jews, because Luther believed the reason the Jews didn't receive Jesus as the Messiah is because the Catholic Church had so misrepresented him that they couldn't see him as the Messiah. So Luther's thinking was, now that I've sorted all that out, I'm going to tell the Jews the truth about Jesus' Messiahship, and they're going to embrace him. And when they didn't embrace Luther's presentation of Jesus as the Messiah, that's when he became very much against them. So, yeah.
Wow.
What do you guys think? I mean, it's one of those things. Like, I totally get what Brent's saying, because there are times when, if I'm going to quote Luther, there are times when I feel at times I need to qualify, my quotations of Martin Luther.
Yeah.
So,
well, there's a lot of people that seem to be ignorant. I think even amongst your Calvinistic crowd, they can so hail Luther that they lose sight of his against the Jews. And some of the different tracts that he would write that did have incendiary language against them. And I think it's important for us to remember that while we're thankful for some of the reform that was brought about as it relates to the gospel, there are things that were flawed with him. But nevertheless, we can still read the material, like Ravi Zacharias. You can still benefit from his book, even though he had some tremendous moral lapses in his life that we were ignorant of. Or you take Ulrich Zwingli in Zurich, Switzerland, drowning the Anabaptists. Or you take John Calvin calling for the death of Michael Servetus. And so you have these different figures. Soren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher who, didn't really connect to the church. Really, he saw the church, the Dutch church is completely corrupt, and he removed himself from it. And, he had his own issues that were kind of contorted. Nevertheless, you can gain a lot from these people in the same way there's lots of leaders today with moral failure. You don't throw out their books and not read it. Truth is truth, and we can separate it. And not only that, think about how the authors of scriptures. I mean, you've got people, David, for example. I mean, here's a guy that if somebody today did what David did, you probably wouldn't go out and buy and read their books. Yet he penned many of the Psalms, and there's a lot to get out of it. Or Solomon, he had a whole harem of women. That's an understatement. And so we can go on and on. And that's the beauty of the Bible. It's not that these authors are these great people. It's God's using people who are weak, who are flawed, and he uses them in spite of themselves, and they experience consequences for their actions. Nevertheless, he still honors the little bit of faith that they would have. And so I'm thankful for that.
Tony, anything to add?
No, that was outstanding. The only thing I would just add to the whole Luther thing was that he thought that the book of James was a spurious book and didn't think it belonged in the canon of scripture. But, just like the great doctor said, you got folks that's done some great things. And because they're human beings, they've done there are times in their life they were terrible human beings. And so you're right. You're right.
Brent, thank you for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective.
And this is the marvel.
Hey, Brian?
Yeah. Yes. Which Brian are you talking to?
You go ahead after the marvel. I'll remember my statement. I want to hear your insight.
We've all touched on it already, but I mean, it is the marvel of anybody being saved. We are saved despite who we are, not because of who we are. And we're always saved by grace. And our whole journey is a journey that is marked by grace. But for the grace of God, there we'd all go. Because every one of us we're still sinners. We're a work in progress, but God help us.
Yeah.
The thing I would just add I thought that's a good point what Tony brought out about James. That's a true statement. You could be sympathetic to Luther in reading James in light of, you're saved by faith, not of works. And he's trying to reconcile the book of James. And then he's kind of twisted up on, how do we put this together? And I think for our audience that might wonder how that happens is, in the book of Romans, that's talking about our justification. We're in Romans 1:17, where he has this great epiphany. In the book of James, this is talking about our sanctification. So our sanctification we can see in the book of James. So you wouldn't go to the book of James to preach justification. You would show how our Christian life as a result of justification is lived out in sanctification. And if we don't have works to demonstrate that we've truly been justified by the works of Christ, then we have reason to question whether or not we have true justifying faith as seen in Romans 1:17.
Mm-hmm. And I think a good, even simpler way to understand that is to understand that Romans, or Paul, we'll just use Paul and James, Paul is looking at salvation from God's lens. James is looking at it from the human lens. So here's how God sees you. Here's how we see each other. So I'm not going to know that you actually have faith. God knows you have faith because he sees deep into the heart. I'm only going to know you have faith if you show it to me. That's what James is talking about, right?
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great conversation today on Pastor's Perspective. You can check the archives a little bit later on when they'll be posted on Facebook, YouTube, and Spotify. Veronica in California, you're next. Hello.
Yes, hello?
You have a question about Philippians chapter 2, verses 6 through 8.
Yes. My question is, and I'm reading from the NLT, is this saying that Jesus is God? And the reason I'm asking is because that I have got into a conversation with somebody about this, and this person says that he's a Christian, but he was saying that Jesus isn't God and that we're worshiping an idol, that being Jesus.
Whoa.
So I kind of gave him this verse, and I also encouraged him to read Exodus 3, where Moses is talking to God, and God refers to himself as I am, and Jesus also refers to himself as I am. I just wanted to know if I gave him the right verses, and also, this Philippians 2, 6 through 8. Jesus is God, right?
Yeah, Veronica, you hit the nail on the head. Yes, absolutely. And your, counsel, your sharing with him, you shared with him exactly what needs to be stated. And yes, indeed, Jesus is God. Of course, there's many passages that say this, but one of my favorite is Philippians chapter 2. And I'm not sure how the NLT reads, but the NIV, I think, and I think it's probably very similar, it just makes it so clear. Speaking of Jesus, who being in very nature God. So, you can't really say it any more plainly there than that, can you?
Yeah.
Right.
He did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant. So, absolutely. Yep, that's what the text is saying.
And when it says thinking in equality, though he did not think of equality with God,
yeah.
What exactly does that mean?
Well, like the NIV clarifies, he didn't think that equality with God should be used to his own advantage. So in other words, he wasn't like, I'm God and I'm just going to stay in my eternal position here, and I'm not going to use my divinity to help humans. He didn't do that. He did the exact opposite of that. He, who could have just retained his stature, as he had been for eternity, he humbled himself instead, and he became a human being, and he took upon the form of a servant, and ultimately he died on a cross.
So here's Veronica, who knows that Jesus is God, but somebody comes along and starts sowing these seeds of doubt, and now she's like, wait, this is true, right? And there's so many people that try to do things like that and get us off track. Tony, what would you tell Veronica?
No, what Pastor Brian said is definitely right. The Philippians 2, is talking, Jesus is speaking of both Jesus being God and Jesus being man. And so what he said was outstanding.
Yes, it was. Veronica, thanks for your phone call today on Pastor's Perspective. We have run out of time, so sorry if we couldn't get to your call today. We'll be back tomorrow between 3 and 4 p.m. Pacific time. Give us a call then. The same phone number, 888-564-6173. As I said a little bit ago, today's program will be archived on Facebook, YouTube, and Spotify if you want to listen to it again or share it with a friend. So, and if on YouTube, you could probably do it on Facebook and the other one as well, but on YouTube, you can click the little bell icon at the top, and then you'll get notified every time we do a live video. So thanks so much for listening today. God bless you guys. For Brian Broderson, Bobby Conway, and Tony Clark, I'm Brian Perez. Pastor's Perspective is sponsored by Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa.